This is going to be about the artwork of the North, that is Northern Europe, the countries of Germany, the Low Countries, Netherlands, France, and to some extent England later. Um, Before we start with the works that were done in the 1300s in this region, let's look back some hundreds of years what kind of work they had in the Middle Ages. Now, Europe, you can think of it as having two different cultures blended together. One is the Roman culture, and which came from the Greek culture. And at the time of both of those civilizations, there were people, indigenous people of Northern Europe, who were nomadic. Being nomadic, they couldn't make monumental architecture like the Greeks and the Romans did. They made small personal art, like this. This is one piece from England, found at an archaeological site called Sutton Hoo, and there's some neat stuff there. There's this, and there's this work as well. That I wanted to show as an example of the kind of artwork and the qualities that it had. Not necessarily these pieces in particular, but qualities that you can generalize about their art. Because they're nomadic, they make things they can carry with them easily, so they're small. And in order to make them special, they make them out of precious materials like gold and silver, and they use jewels. And in this case, there's some glass inlay. They're very beautiful, decorative things filled with patterns. Decorative patterns, sometimes geometric, organic patterns, but also images of the scary world. You can see there's some sort of dragon or snakes or things that are interlaced in this area right here. You can see, say, this is a head. This is a head here. That's an eye. These are eyes here. And they're scary monsters. Here you have a man who's being attacked by two, beasts like wolves or something. And there's some other monsters here look like birds. When you're nomadic, I guess one of the features of life is that nature is difficult and that you have to struggle for existence, much more so than you would if you were living in the civilization, either the Greeks or the Romans. And so, the evil spirits, the dark world is a bigger thing in your life. So you depict it in art. The features that we see here are going to be features of Northern art. Now, throughout the Middle Ages, these features come up all the time. When we think of those manuscript illuminations, they were done, century after this. They're filled with these same sorts of patterns. They love the interlace, like these shapes. We have one thing going over and under another shape to make a very wonderful pattern, like a weaving pattern. They like that. They like the fact that it's small, portable, precious materials, and decorative patterns. And the monsters. They'll come back. We'll see monsters later. They're very good in the North of making up monsters. The first work on your list for the North is by Jean Pucelle, and this is a book of hours. This is a tiny book. It's I think each page is about the size of a business card, 3.5 inches tall. So it's very tiny, fits in the palm of your hand, and it fills the bill of being very small and portable and precious. It doesn't have the precious material, though there's probably some gold in it. It is made on vellum, which was a very difficult thing to come by. And, the best artist at the time, Jean Pucelle, was asked to illustrate it and to decorate it. And it's just filled with all sorts of stories, images, very imaginative images of stuff you need to know for a Christian life, for a young girl, that she would have. A book of hours means that hours are for you do prayers at certain hours of the day. I think there's 7 of them. The first one's called matins, and we get the word matinee from that one. And The last one, the evening one, is called Vespers. You may have heard of Vespers. We have an event here called Christmas Vespers, and it takes place in the evening. But there's 7 of them, and you have to say prayers at different hours of the day, and you need a book to tell you which prayers to pray at one time, at the appropriate time. It also has stories and things that a pious person would need to know and to see and contemplate and meditate upon. This book is open to 2 images, and your book. These are from your book, and they're selected, I imagine, so that you can compare them to the same sort of images you've seen before, and you'll see later. On the left is the Kiss of Judas. On the right is an Annunciation. First, in order to understand what this image is like and how to see it in a context, just a century before, this is an Annunciation. And you see, it has the qualities of being, small, precious materials. This sort of brownish color is actually gold. Difficult to photograph gold, but that's gold. And it's got the patterns. It's got, decorative prettiness. But the figures are paper doll figures. They're very flat. The architecture is flat. This is typical of a medieval thing. This represents a different view of the world, a world in which you want the people in it to look like real people, at least, to some extent. They occupy real space. They are something you can identify with. You imagine the folks making this weren't thinking them as real people like us. They're like they're making images of, say, spirits, something mystical, something that is so far away. Whereas these, the people are more accessible. And when you think of the prior century, just coming to the fore was the work of St. Francis of Assisi and his desire or teaching that for a Christian you can have a personal relationship with God, and that the artist, I guess, took this, illustrated this, showing people in these images to look like real people. There's a very strong similarity between this Annunciation and this one by Duccio. Look at the rafters here, the fact that Mary is seated in this space, and Gabriel's coming in, and these 2 arched spaces, or this little room here with 2 arched walls. I guess a loggia is what you might call that. This has that same sort of thing in it, and it's curious. One explanation is that some artists from Siena who had seen the Duccio had traveled to the north and to France, and had influenced the group of artists there and brought this little innovation. He may also have brought the way to treat figures as the little doll-like kind of figures that you see here. They're like little toys, but that grace of them, it seems kind of like Sienese art. And there's those little rafters right there. Since this is so tiny, it's hard to compare in the sense of, one large reason why this is different from the same image or the same story being told in another media is it's very small and you can't put as much detail. But given that it's small, it's amazing that it has as much detail as it has. Let's look first at the Annunciation. There's a building. It seems convincing. Unlike that Duccio we just saw, the Gabriel is inside this little room. It's a bit out of scale with Gabriel, and that's a consistent thing in the North. You'll see it many times, is that people, even when they are represented realistically, are not often, or not always, shown to scale with one another and with the buildings that are in. Buildings often are small. And you can think of them depicting not what they're thinking of as representing the real world, but almost like a stage world. This same story being told, say, in a church-sponsored play, the kind of thing that they would actually put on, and people would see and go, and people would dress up in costumes, and they would perform and act out the different events. There's the banner saying Ave Maria. The angel is holding it rather than having it spoken, but it's a way for the artist to get across what this story is. In case you didn't know, it's a very common sort of image. Look at the marginal images. Marginalia is called. A little angel up here holding something and up in the clouds. Some architectural framing. There's an angel holding the building up. There's an angel playing music here, and this is the letter D for Domine. This is Labia Me. I don't know, something that means open. Apre, something like that. Lord, open my lips. This is an image of the person this was made for. The patron was a duke, and very wealthy, and he was married to this young woman who was I think 14, and gave her this as a wedding present. And this is an image of her. She's like a duchess wearing a crown, and she's kneeling, looking at this very book that we're holding. She has a guard outside her room, and a little dog here, and look like the D is made of some sort of animal that has an old man's head there. There's a shoulder, and there's a little leg. Other little thing, there's a monkey, and there's I guess that might be a cat. There's some children playing, some sort of game, probably a recognizable game. So it's just a wealth of little details in here, and each one has, some meaning. And having lots of little things with meanings and extra apart from the main picture is yet another aspect of Northern art that we will see as we get farther along in the progression. We will see things get more naturalistic, and the qualities that this has will continue on with other works, such as having little objects that mean things lying around in rooms, and though these figures are not particularly naturalistic, they are much more naturalistic than previous ones, and later ones will just further this. Let's look at the Kiss of Judas. We saw this in Giotto and in Duccio, and they each represent it in a different way. This is closer, I guess, in spirit to the Duccio, though there's not as much energy. This is represented like almost like a little toy version of the same story. This figure, this sort of slumping S-curve kind of figure, mirrors Mary over here. So he's looking in terms of the composition as one whole thing, that there's a relationship between these two. And this is a medieval way of making figures, this sort of S-curve, but they're very graceful. Look at this very delicate hand, and it's reaching down to heal the ear that's about to be cut off by Peter. But it doesn't have the action of Duccio or the tension of Giotto. You see, just as Giotto had, it has a bunch of heads in the back representing the soldiers, wearing contemporary armor, and their weapons sticking up in the air. But it doesn't have the pointing action that the Giotto had to create a tension. And also there's no just strong motion towards the faces of Judas and Jesus. And Judas's face is not, rendered like like ugly versus beautiful thing. It's just a face. So I guess you could account for that by the fact that it's very, very small, and you can't do that much at this scale. The same artist who, if he ever had an occasion to make a fresco or a panel painting, might have done it more like either of the two artists we've seen before, but in this case it's different. Some other little things of interest. There's knights jousting, and they're on goats, and they're the target is a wine barrel, maybe a reference to the Eucharist. And the reason if you read your book, he does mention, the Eucharist with the wine and the bread. Whenever you see anything that has to do with wine and bread or wheat associated with anything to do with Jesus or Mary, then they are references to the Eucharist. And it's just one of those things. The Northern artists like to stick in stuff that may have just no purpose at all, like having a monkey there. I don't know if a monkey means anything, but if it does, it's put there for that meaning. They just like to fill it with lots of little extra meanings. I can show you just as contrast. This is Giotto's version of people in a room, angel coming in, and Giotto likes big volumetric figures with lots of real space that they're in, and this is much more convincing in terms of rendering space than Jean Pucelle here. But we have to remember, and also it's much earlier. I mean, Giotto is 1310, say, and this is much later in the century. But this is not by somebody who had seen the Giotto, and the folks in the north were slower at some things than others. Like they advanced much farther than the Italians in certain aspects of naturalism, and they were much far behind in other aspects. The main difference is that the folks in the north were really good at the surfaces of things. They looked at objects and they represented, they studied them. They wanted to make them look just the way they look, but on the surface. They were very big on surfaces. They like representing materials exactly the way they look. If something shines, if something is, matte, if it's metal or glass or fabric or wood, they want to differentiate that. But as far as the underlying structures of things and the structure of space and where things are in space, it was the Italians who were farther ahead. I can show you another page just to show that this book has lots and lots of things that are similar in that there's pictures on either side, and they have frames and marginal decorations. Okay, moving on. This is an artist named Theodoric, and this chapel is in Prague. Prague is or was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and that's, you can read in your book on the historical details, what caused that to be and what was happening to it at the time. But for our purposes here, a king wanted to, had some money, and he wanted to create a central place of power in Prague, and he had made this chapel. And oddly, I guess when you say seen from the Italian point of view, I've never seen this before. They decorate the wall with paintings, but they're paintings on panels affixed to the wall. And each painting has a frame, and the frame is kind of box-like. And the frames themselves are containers that contain relics of saints. If you can see just in this picture, I'll zoom in a little of it. I mean, you can see a crucifix up there, but there's lots of saints, and each saint's held in a book, and its attributes to represent, identify the saint, and there's, they're containers with relics and reliquaries. Okay, so we're going to look at one of them, which is the image of Saint Luke. Master Theodoric is we don't know that much about him. You can read about his details in the book. But for looking at this image, we will see things about it that we're going to see more of in the north. This is a portrait of a person. It looks like an actual person, like the artist looked at someone, maybe even himself, or someone, in order to make the saint look like an actual person, someone that you can identify with. It looks like your uncle or something. The reason that it has an ox is because the ox, or winged ox, is a symbol for Luke. Each of the four gospel writers has a symbol from what's called the tetramorph, and from time immemorial, these are the way you identify the different gospel writers. So you have a man looking at you. You see his cloak is blue, and his hand is sticking out. There's some sort of cross shape here, and he's got a book, and he's open and showing it to you, kind of an awkward pose. It kind of looks awkward. The eyes look weird. Zoom in on a little bit. These eyes look weird. This stare is odd. There's also an odd change in sharpness. Things are soft here, like this transition between darker blue and lighter blue. This whole thing, it almost looks, airbrushed in its softness. But when you get to the eyes here, and like the edge of the book and the edge of the fingers, also the difference between the way the hand is rendered and the way the cloth is rendered, there seems to be sharp contrasts. That's just an oddness. This is weird in many ways. This surface in the background. We're used to seeing panels that the Italians made that had gesso, and they're covered with gold and they're tooled. This is some other kind of metal. I don't know what it is. It might be copper, and it has stamped with all these patterns, a little awkwardly. I mean, they don't seem to be as rigorous in their geometry as the Italians would, and they have elaborate patterning images. They look like little spheres, like maybe grapes. Maybe it's a grapevine motif of some sort. The halo is all tooled with all these things, little patterns, little details, and it makes the figure stand out so differently, as a different material entirely. Odd having this ox here coming out of the clouds is what this blue stuff is, because it's realistic. When you do something that's realistic, of image of something that is a symbol, that's an odd juxtaposition. If it's a symbol, it should look like a symbol. But in the Middle Ages, you would see things like this, and because things are not represented realistically, the fact that it's a symbol, fits, because the person himself is a symbol. But in this case, the person looks like a person. Look at this hand. I mean, I don't have that much resolution to zoom in much, but you can see that. You can see the skin and the blood vessels underneath the skin, and this has been observed accurately from reality, and there was a strong desire to reproduce just what a hand looks like. This hand too, so much so that the concern was only on the hand. You can see that when he gets to the cloth, he's going into some sort of stylized version of cloth. The face also has a similar degree of realism in this beard, with the different layers of grays in order to show the aging quality of this saint, and it's giving it an individual feature like a curly beard, so you could distinguish it from other saints who may have a different textured beard and a different face, so that they look like real people. They are distinguished from one another. When you look at, say, a medieval version of this sort of thing, there's not that much differentiation in faces. So the new quality here is differentiation of faces, making people look like real people that you can identify with, so that the saints become more real to you, or you can have more of a closer personal relationship with them. You can see them as more like yourself. Master Theodoric. Now the next work is a sculpture. It's made of wood. It's small, and it's called the Vesperbild. This is an image of Mary holding the dead body of Christ after the crucifixion. It's not. She's not holding it in the sense that this is something as telling a story. This is something to contemplate. There are, in those books of hours, they differentiate between two sets of kinds of imagery. One is the joys of the Virgin and the sorrows of the Virgin, and this would be one of the sorrows. The Annunciation would be one of the joys, and people would contemplate in different hours of the day the joys and sorrows, and it happened to be in Vespers is when you contemplated and meditated upon the sorrows of the Virgin, and this would be one. And you see something here that's just, it is a northern quality. It's particularly a German quality that is ugliness and despair and showing pain and distortion. Uh, the people in Italy didn't go for this sort of thing. They liked the ideal, and I guess it goes back to the Greeks, I suppose, because the Greeks in their literature they had a concept when you think of Greek plays, that when you had a play, things happened on the stage called the skene, the scene, and things that were off stage would be obscene. Our word obscene, obscene, comes from obscene. I mean, the things that happen off stage. And lots of horrible things happen in Greek plays, but you don't see them. They happen off stage. Because it sort of kills the suspension of disbelief. If you're watching a play and you're into the story and you're watching people acting like other people, but you sort of believe them to be those people during the course of their saying their lines and they're acting out the story. And if something really gruesome occurs, you're sort of taken out of the story, and that destroys it. In order to keep the illusion going, if something were to happen, like I don't know, Oedipus gouges out his eyes, and Agamemnon is killed in his bathtub, things like that occur off stage. You hear about it later when someone comes in and says something off stage happened terrible, and you can still stay in the story. So their art as well, when you looked at visual art, the representation of figures, there's no, I can't think of much instances where they show distortions and mutilations. They like the idealized versions of figures. If there's a tragedy or something, you might see it in an expression on a face, or you just know the story. That you know what happened to this person, but they like to represent things at their best. The North, not so much. They didn't mind at all showing gruesomeness, horror, despair, ugliness. It was all part of the deal. I mean, when the world has joys and sorrows, and they were glad to represent the sorrows, and when they did, they really did. I mean, you look at this, the wounds of Christ are these great big horrible things. Your book calls them rosettes. This is the hole, gaping holes in the hands and in the side, and the blood is matted there, and it's wood that's painted. So the blood is painted, is running down the arm. The body is horribly emaciated. The spikes of the thorns and the expression on the face, everything is meant to elicit in you a response of pity. The word pietà, the Italian word, means pity. Later we'll see images in painting where they do this sort of things in painting. But I wanted you to see this aspect of Northern art, that they are perfectly comfortable with representing horrific things. Okay, this is a panel painting by Broederlam, and this will be one on your list. And it's a panel. It's a what can we call it? It's an altarpiece. It's a diptych, and it folds, and it makes a different shape. So it's kind of odd because we're not seeing it the way in the context it would be. But just go with it here and see the different shapes. This is both of them. I have one. This is an image of just one on the side. We can zoom in on it, but you can sort of see the layout of them. They both have a landscape and a building, and 4 stories are being told, or one story is told in different scenes. This is an Annunciation with Mary inside a architectural setting with Gabriel over here. I'll show it closer in a bit. And there's God the Father there, and his speaking the word. Remember, the word becomes flesh, and a little straight line straight to Mary's head. This is, her becoming pregnant. This is the Visitation, where Mary meets Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and she's pregnant, and the baby leaps in her womb because actually it's they're both pregnant, and it's John is the baby that leaps because he's in the presence of Jesus, who's in the womb of Mary here. So that's the visitation. On this side is the presentation in the temple. It's Mary presenting Jesus, and there's a story in the Bible of the priest who takes or rabbi, I guess, who takes the baby and sees it. I think his blindness is healed. And on the right is the flight into Egypt. So 4 different stories are told as one continuous thing on these 2 panels, and they are in, this pair is in one continuous space, and this pair is in another continuous space, very similar to one another. Let's look at them closer. Oh, we got some resolution to look at it closer here. This is Gabriel. He's got this banner here with the words in Latin. I suppose I can't see them well, but I'm sure it says Hail Mary, full of Ave Maria, plenum, something like that, full of grace. There's the lilies. There's you can see how Gabriel is represented in terms of his drapery, his volume, light and dark, the decorative aspect. Does he look like like an object in space the way a Giotto would do it? Is he more like a Sienese representation? This box of space for the architecture, seems a little awkward in the sense of, well, it's this sort of thing that it's a cube of space that you see in like a wide-angle lens, where you're looking way up at one of the top part and way down at the other one. But it's so as to give this presentation of a person in this space. So she looks like she's in it, looking out of it, and he's gone to trouble to show you all of the different details of it, to make it look like something architectural, like a Gothic architecture, with this, the cusps, all the little decorative statuettes and things, all this building up here. I mean, this is probably entirely made up. In fact, it looks a little Italian. I don't know why. But these look, convincing individually in their space and their pattern. They look convincing. At the small scale, at the surface scale, everything looks convincing and real. As a whole, there is a kind of an awkward spatial thing, and it's something that the artists of the North didn't really have that much problem with. We will see others as the surface detail and observation of nature gets closer and closer to nature. It becomes more evident that they're not really understanding space, or at least they're not as concerned, I guess I should say, with space as and how things are related in space. They're just putting them in there and letting their skill in detail tell you what's going on. When I look at this figure, there's no casting shadow. There's no, you can't see the feet. You can't see the body underneath the clothes. The clothes are a surface pattern, which is nice and pretty surface pattern with all sorts of neat little lines and stuff going around. But you don't see the body underneath. You don't see how it relates to the ground or where it is in relation to stuff. It's just, it's kind of like a paper doll, but closer, say, in spirit to a Duccio or to Simone Martini's version of figures, but it doesn't seem to have as much grounding, I guess. Mary, though pains have been taken to show her in this space, she herself doesn't seem that much. You can't really tell. I mean, the clothes mask so much. I can't. This hand sticking up here. I guess it's her left hand. I mean, nope, that's her right hand. So it would be the one on this side of her body. But it's so awkward. It's kind of difficult to see how it fits with the arm, because the artist's not really thinking. This is just a lumpy piece of cloth, with a person under it. We don't actually see how the person is arranged. I guess this is a knee, and this is an elbow. But apart from that, it's kind of obscure. Look at the patterns. For no reason at all. There's this big loud pattern on the floor over here, and there's one in here, and they don't match up in terms of to be on the same plane as one another. But of course, they're not they're not concerned with it because they're not thinking in terms of everything being seen from the same point of view, which is what you get with perspective, Italian perspective, and that's not going to be invented till later, and the people in the north aren't even going to know about it for some time after it's invented in Italy. It has a gold ground. A gold ground is one of those indicators that we're not in the real world, and the contrast between things that are, to some degree look pretty real with this gold ground is something that they're going to soon depart from. The jumping away from the gold ground is one of those things that, well, we think about it this way. The patron who's paying for this is paying for the gold. And one of the things that you get when you use gold, and you pay for it, and you've made something that is gold, you put it in the church, it shows off your wealth. Gold, everybody sees it and knows that's an expensive thing. When they write the contract, they will say, I want you to use so much gold. I want you to use so much blue, or blue is a very valuable thing. And they would specify this because they want the audience for this to know how much money was spent by seeing the precious materials. As we move forward, it's not going to be the thing that is conspicuous about the money spent is not going to be the materials so much as the work of the artist. When the artists are able to depict reality to a certain degree and to make the picture look really special by their own skill, it is the skill of the artist that is being paid for and is the showing off thing. This is the right panel with the visitation. This is a nice instance of figures in a space. You have these figures. You can tell that they're behind these two very, very skinny poles, I guess. They're in a church. This is an apse of a church, and that's a wonderful rendering of vaulting from apsidial vaulting, where you have a curved space with lots of windows, and each window has its vault going up to this gold point up here. Beautiful painting of the blues and the light blues. Very convincing space, though it's what you would call intuitive perspective. That means that they're not using linear perspective. They're just painting it. They're just making it up. They're just guessing, and their guesses get closer and closer to the reality as we move along. But here you can tell there's some awkwardness, but it's convincing enough for the audience that's seeing this. In fact, they would look at this and see, this is new. We haven't seen this degree of fidelity to nature. Lots of little details, like this little water thing, some sort of drain pipe and a reservoir of water here, or what would be filled with water. Don't know what it's for, but it looks real. And these landscape is a stylized landscape. It doesn't look like he went out into nature and copied it. This follows some sort of pattern that he must have had to represent what nature actually looked like. We will see instances later of artists who go out in nature and paint exactly what the world looks like. Joseph has stopped to drink some water, and he has his clothes and things in a bundle on his back. Look at the boots. I mean, the artist has gone to lots of trouble to make you see all of the, what I would call the stuff, the materials of the world, and to show off that he has observed them and to see how light falls on them, how real he can make them. Look how real and spatial, I guess you could say, that this rendering right here is compared to Gabriel here, which isn't particularly convincing at all in terms of the same notion of objects in space. The fact that they're going back in space, but they seem to be going up on the panel. That's a way of indicating that it's farther away. This is a little statue that's being being toppled over at the coming of Jesus, because Jesus means that the pagans are being, he's superseding them. Again, an example of a symbolic thing rendered as a real thing. Moving on, this is Claus Sluter. He's a sculptor. This is called the Well of Moses. The Duke that paid for this also paid for an entire monastery of monks that their whole purpose was to pray for his soul. They didn't do anything other than pray. He had to give them food to eat and everything. They, unlike other monasteries that were self-sufficient and they were very industrious, these monks, all they did was pray. So they had to have a patron to pay for their living. And he wanted them to pray for him, and he had them made these, lots of elaborate stuff. I'll show you some other examples of stuff they made. Images of monks that all their job was to do was to pray for him. This was a well, or this used to be water down here, and this is just the base or pedestal of another sculpture that's up above it. There was a crucifix and John and Mary up there. All we have left is just this part, and we're going to look at this. And this image of the side that has Moses on it is the one we're emphasizing. I guess if you ever saw it on a test, this would be the one you would compare to something else if that were to come up. Look at these figures. This is Moses. It looks like he's gone out and found some actual old man with a beard and copied all of the features of the face, the wrinkles, the nose, the way the beard falls, all of these things. I've seen people that look just like this. Oddly, it has horns. That's not a feature that people have, but it is a feature of Moses. It has to do with a mistranslation of Jerome, who translated the Vulgate, that is Hebrew into Latin the first time, I think in the 400s, I believe. He had a mistake when Moses came down from the mountain. Light shone from his face, rays of light, and the word for rays, I believe it was mistranslated as horns. And later, the idea of rays of light, that's where we get the idea of the halo, that holy figures have light shining from them, and that's where halo comes from. But originally it was mistranslated, and Moses had horns, and early Christian representations of Moses had horns, and it became a tradition. Even when the mistake was fixed and people knew, it's rays of light, not horns, they still have horns. In fact, 100 years after this, Michelangelo does an image of Moses. He puts horns on him just because it's traditional. Put horns on Moses. This has the same qualities that Master Theodoric, St. Luke, has, in that it looks like a real person, somebody that you know, or somebody, like somebody you know, like a grandfather kind of image. He wants him to look accessible. Look at him again up here. It's made of, I believe this is limestone, and it's cut and beautifully rendered, and it's got lots of patterns of cloth. There's not a lot of rendering of what the figure looks like underneath the cloth, but it's very massive and monumental. There's not a lot of monumental sculpture in the North. They didn't really have that much of a tradition for it. When they did do sculpture, they put it was part of cathedrals. This is an example of Rheims Cathedral, some hundreds of years before what we're talking about. But this is the kind of sculpture you would get, and you would have these. This is done by three different sculptors. The one on the left, the figure, they're called jamb figures. I mean, jamb is the place, the embrasure of a doorway on either side of a portal of a church, and it has all these colonnettes, and the figures would be part of the colonnette. And Oftentimes, in fact, earlier than this, the figures would look a whole lot like columns themselves. And this figure is so attenuated, stretched out little head, looks kind of like a column, and this one does as well, though a little bit more naturalistic. And this one, or this pair, this is a visitation, by the way. The artist who made this had access to actual Roman sculpture and was trying to emulate it. This is Roman togas. This is his representation of figure with a contrapposto pose, knees poking out, engaged leg. Rather clever representation. So they had all, they were all over the place. And in the North, when it comes to sculpture, I mean, they had architectural sculpture, fine, but an individual sculpture that was much more rare. The Vesperbild would be examples, very small, not on a monumental scale. He was also painted. His kind of paint's worn off a lot, but they painted sculpture. Lots of people in the past painted sculptures, and we don't think of it sculpture as something that ought to be painted. And there's a historical reason for that. I understand that the Greek sculptures that of the classical Greek, that those had been painted, but they're not painted now. The paint wore off, and and it was normal to paint sculptures all the way up through the Middle Ages. But in the Renaissance, when they started digging up sculpture from the past, it didn't have its paint on it anymore, and they just assumed that it had never been painted. And when they made their own sculpture, they didn't put paint on it, and so. That is, the Italians didn't, and it became a tradition. You make a sculpture of a figure, it's essentially the color of the stone, or the marble, or the limestone, or the bronze, or whatever you do. You just make it that color, and paint is not a part of it. But in the North here, they still maintained that. I expect that when these were new, these were painted. Let's look at the other figures around. I think it's a six-sided thing. So there's different Old Testament prophets and figures. I think this is David is one of them. This must be King David and Jeremiah. People who've prefigured Christ in their writings. Wonderful representation of these angels. Look at the emotion being expressed. We can zoom in a little. This has his hands up to his eyes to wipe away tears. The cloth is being pulled tight in a very tense manner, so as a way to express the emotion on the inside. And this one has this arms crossed in this facial expression. Again, the folks in the North they like to express emotion much more so than the folks in the South. They also use the drapery, the cloth, the movement, the folds as an expressive element. As I was just showing here, all of the figures have expressive drapery. It's wild, I guess you can say. It goes all over the place. It shows an emotional state, even if the face is not expressing one. That there's turbulence and stuff going on with the figure. And the people in the South, that is, the Italians, that's a contrast between them, because when they made sculptures, it's the figure. It's all about the figure, and the drapery is a secondary thing, a decorative thing on top of a figure, but you always see the figure. The North, not so much. They use the drapery, the external thing, the surface thing, as the expressive element. These are little figures that I love. Some of them are in the Met, I think. These are figures that were made by Sluter, same artist, and they're like little mourners. They're the monks that he had hired to mourn for him, and they're representations of those monks mourning for him. And these would be set around the tomb where the Duke was buried, and these again have that same quality of using the drapery as an expression of sorrow, or expression of what's going on inside. You don't see the figure. You don't see here. You see a hand, but you don't see anything else. Here's some hands, a little bit of a face, but look at these hoods cover their faces, and just the tilt of the head, this hand that's coming up underneath the cloth to wipe the eyes, one presumes, that expresses, look at this tension that comes right here when everything gathers together and splays out. More emotion is being expressed than if you had seen their face. That's just a neat thing to me. Here's a close-up of that one. Beautiful thing. A little tiny image. I think it's, I don't know, less than a foot tall. All right, next we see, at the beginning of the 1400s, a work also for a rich patron, a duke, who commissioned this work from the best artists at the time, called the Limbourgh brothers. And this is the very rich hours of the Duc de Berry. That's the duke that paid for this. And it's called the Very Rich Hours because he commissioned lots of people to make lots of books of hours, I expect, and of all of them, this is the richest one. It has, it is, being a book of hours, it deals with calendars and prayer times, and it has the signs of the zodiac. There's 12 images of the months. Each page represents a month, and these are the stars and presumably the days, and I guess they would mark things like holy days and when the different planets are in view, as a way of marking time. So this is the format. You have a semicircular gridded pattern up here that represents the celestial things, and then there's a great big rectangle that is a picture. I can show you real quick. There's another one. It doesn't have the stuff filled in there. This is, and we'll see yet another one here, just to give you a notion that these are pages in a book, and there's 12 of them, one for each month. This is February. February and January are the two that you're responsible for, and they represent two different kinds of type of scenes that are in the pages. Some of the pages, like this one, have to do with, looking at the outside world, looking at the peasants, seeing what their life is like at different times of the year, and the other ones are about the nobility and their life. And there's ones of them doing falcon hunting and stuff like that, the feasting. So you can there's a contrast between the two different worlds, and there's a world of difference between the two. As a landscape, or as a picture of what the world looks like from the point of view of the Duke, who doesn't ever go out and see the world and see what peasants look like, he gets the artist to go do it for him and gives him a picture of a sort of a sanitized view, or even a patronizing view of what the world of the peasants is like. And you can imagine their attitude towards the peasants is sort of like one's attitude towards a pet. They're patronizing. They find them amusing. They like the idea of the peasantry out there doing their thing and happy to work and make stuff for the Duke and the other royals. The observation of nature is exquisite in this. It's I don't know. I think it's about maybe 12 inches tall, something like that, and it's painted on leather, some sort of vellum or parchment, probably with tempera paint, with egg tempera paint. But it's got wonderful details that artists wanted to reproduce very accurately what the world looks like. And so that, to these people who aren't going to go out and look at it, I suppose. This is a wattle fence. They put green sticks around these stakes and create a woven pattern to make a fence. There's a shed here, and there's some awkwardness in the way the perspective, I guess, of the shed is. But as far as the surface decoration, if you call it decoration, the snow and the wood and the patterns of rafters and joists and things, are realistically depicted. Sheep, black sheep, white sheep, birds eating grain, barrels, bunches of sticks, I guess, for firewood, some sort of wagony thing. There's a woman here walking in the snow, and I don't know if you can tell from this, you can see her breath. When the air is cold and you breathe out, there's a kind of a condensation that occurs, and that's an observed thing from nature that the artist has stuck that little detail in, and people would see that and say, "Oh yes, I know when that happens." And that's the same with all these things: beehives, a person chopping wood, trees, kind of almost toy-looking trees. But this is a small picture, and you can't have everything exactly to scale, or else you wouldn't have space for it. This sky looks like a winter sky. The distant village out here, and there's people, doing peasant-y things. Inside the house, we can zoom out a little. Inside the house, a wall is taken away so that we can see inside, and you can see the matron of this house is sitting with a blue dress, and she's more upscale than the two servants next to her, and she's warming herself by the fire. She daintily lifts her skirt, and the peasants, you can see under their clothes, so that I guess the royals would have a big laugh at this. You can see them underneath their clothes, and that's again, it's sort of like, I guess it's sort of, when I think of pets, the royals thinking of their peasants as pets. This would be like those cat videos you see on the internet. It's just an amusing thing. The qualities of the North that we began with in the Jean Pucelle are more advanced here. There's color, and one thing, it's a larger picture. There's opportunities for more detail, and the artist has gone to pains to show you as many little details as he could, so as to reproduce the world as it looks. When it comes to the royals, though, he doesn't do the same degree of looking. This figure, for example, looks like a paper doll. Beautiful clothes with details, the hems with the patterns and the gold, whatever he's doing here, tasting wine or something. All this stuff it doesn't look as real as the outside world, but of course the nobles sort of think of themselves as living in a kind of a fantasy world, and I suppose to some extent it was a fantasy world, not the real world of the peasants. They are beautiful. Their clothes are beautiful. Everything in here is to indicate the wealth of the patron. This is the Duke sitting here at his table with his feast laid out before him. He has dogs on the table eating the food. Different kinds of servants, and the proportions of the servants are awkward. They look I don't know. They look medieval in terms of their proportions. They're little doll-like things, but they do have a kind of a presence, and they seem to be standing on the ground. There's some sort of fabric-y material on the floor there. Right behind him, this is the Duke. This is a fireplace, and there's a fire screen with sparks going up there. Somebody warming himself here. Words that the Duke is saying here. I think he's saying, welcome, come on in, or something. People are eating, drinking. These are the clergymen, people in their finery coming in. This is kind of odd back here because it looks like there's a bunch of war going on behind him. But this is actually a tapestry on the wall, or a painting on the wall indicating a battle, perhaps, that the Duke was in, with knights jousting or fighting with each other with pikes. And some words on the wall, I guess, telling the story of a great battle. So this is a very flat thing, even though it depicts a big space. For no reason, a whole bunch of pattern here. Fleur-de-lis, vegetal patterns with swans. I guess these are the symbols of this Duke and his heraldic kind of symbols. So you have two different kinds of world depicted: the world of the nobility, which is not quite real. It has its own stylized fantasy world kind of thing, and the world of the peasants. Here's another peasant-like world. This is one of the Duke's palaces, and several palaces are depicted in these months. If you want to look more, you can do a Google search for this book, and you can see all of the different pages. And there's lots of these palaces rendered wonderfully. I mean, that's you couldn't ask for a better look at that palace than this. And of course, the patron would want to show off not only he has taste and hires an artist to do this image, but he wants to show off his buildings as well and all his stuff and how many peasants he has working for him. There's a person here sewing gray, and the person is casting a shadow. I don't know, I've heard that this is one of the first instances of a cast shadow in art. And a cast shadow is, when you think of it, is kind of a difficult thing to conceive of. You see it all the time, but it's a fleeting thing. And when you go to make a work of art and depict things, you kind of it's like you're making the thing to some extent, and it's you're drawing the matter. You're painting a picture of the actual object, and you don't. I guess prior to this, they didn't think of the I don't know, the fleeting thing of a shadow and the way it's cast. But as you see, the horse has shadows. Each one of these birds, I think we can zoom in a little bit more. You see each of these birds casts a shadow. It's very consistent. This is a what do you call it? A scarecrow. It has a shadow. There's people way back here next to the palace. They're casting shadows. So the artist is showing off that he understands what the world looks like. He even notices that people have reflections in water. This is a group of people here, and this is their reflection in the water. This is a river, a moat, I guess, around the castle. Beautiful rendering. Look at the shaded side of the building on this side and the lighted side on this side. So all of the light is consistent. It's pretty sophisticated for when it was made, until you think about the fact that at the time this was made, it's very close to when linear perspective was invented. And they could make things in Italy that were even more realistic in terms of spatial relations, because it's measured. This is not a measured way of representing space with this person here and this person here, and there's not a grid, to measure how big people should be at a certain distance. But as far as just, eyeballing it and guessing, it's pretty convincing.